Okay. Good evening, everybody who's on the Zoom and who's here. This week, of course, is parshat Vayaytzay. And I think the most prominent feature of the parsha Vayaytzay for those of us who read Torah is the fact that the entire parsha is one chapter in the Torah. There are no chapter breaks, even though if we look at the layout of the parsha, we seem to have a number of different stories. We have, of course, the story of Yaakov's dream about the ladder. We have the story of Yaakov and the well meeting Rachel. We have the story of all of the birth of Yaakov's children, with the exception of Binyamin, who will be born next week in parshat Vayishlach. And then how Yaakov has to deal with Lavan, etc., etc. So we have quite a number of different topics. And as I say, the most interesting thing is the fact that the entire parsha is one long chapter in the Torah. No chapter breaks in, paragraph breaks in the Torah as it's written. So I was going to focus on a couple of issues, but I wanted to start with the story of the well. Even though that's not the beginning of the parsha, the beginning of the parsha is, of course, Yaakov's dream. But I wanted to start with the story of the well and a comparison of the stories of the well in this week's parsha, in 2 weeks ago's parsha, and we're going to have a third story of somebody meeting somebody at a well later on in parshat Shemot, where Moshe is going to meet a bunch of ladies at a well. And so I wanted to look at the differences and the compare and contrast these three stories. But before I do that, I just wanted to mention that wells play a very significant role in Sefer Breshit and Shemot, where Moshe meets, and then they disappear from the Torah virtually. There are no mentions of wells again until the 40th year when the Jews are traveling at the end of Sefer Bamidbar. Wells completely disappear. And I suspect that part of that has to do with giving us an understanding of the importance of wells in Eretz Israel vis-a-vis their lack of importance in Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim didn't need wells because they had the water from the Nile as a, quote, perpetual source of water, unquote. But in Eretz Israel, wells are very important. We had the whole story of the wells last week with Yitzchak and Avimelech. And we have the story of Hagar with Yishmael, where he's dying of thirst. A well is involved. So there are lots of stories of wells in Bereshit. But as I said, throughout the rest of the Torah, they seem to vanish. Till, as I said, the Jews are in the desert. At the end of they're traveling in the desert. We again meet them having to worry about water. On another note, we know that water is often used as a metaphor for Torah. And for those who study Torah, and the reason being, at least according to Midrashically, that the fact that water is something that flows downhill. It's supposed to be a constant reminder that we should not think just because we have acquired a little bit of knowledge in Torah that we are high and mighty. We need to always realize that for everything we know, there's not much more that we don't know. And so I think that's one of the metaphors of wells and water for wisdom, and why it is a metaphor for wisdom. And having said that, I think it's very interesting that two of the patriarchs have their shidduch is arranged at a well, and of course our greatest leader Moshe Rabbeinu also seems to have a well involved in his shidduch. And so I wanted to look at these three stories and look at some similarities and some differences between these three stories. So if you look if you can look at the screen, we've got three different columns, and they're not necessarily in chronological order because I figured I had to put this week's parsha in the immediate right-hand side. The middle one is the story of Rivka and Eliezer, and the one on the far left is Moshe Rabbeinu and his well story. So the interesting thing is that if we compare them, the story of all of them start with somebody traveling. Okay, in our story, we're told that Yaakov lifts up his feet and travels to the land of the sons of the east, Bnei Kedem. Again, there's the word Vayelech. The word Vayelech appears very prominently in the middle column where Rivka is is meeting. Eliezer meets Rivka. It says twice that Eliezer. It says twice Vayelach. He gets up to takes the camels to go, and he goes. And in Moshe's case, the word Vayelach doesn't appear. It's Vayivrach Moshe. Moshe is running away, even though if we think back to the beginning of our story, perhaps Yaakov is also running away. And that's what the Navi is going to say in the Haftorah, says by Yivrach Yaakov, Yaakov runs away. Nonetheless, the Torah tells us by Yelach, he's walking. He doesn't seem to have that urgency of running away. One of the contrasts clearly is the fact that in the case of Rivka, where Eliezer is going on a prearranged mission to find a wife, he is well prepared for his journey. It says, he takes 10 camels with him. Yaakov, it appears, it says, Yaakov Braglov, Yaakov appears is traveling literally with the shirt on his back and not a whole lot else. And clearly Moshe, who is running away from Paro, is also clearly traveling with not a whole lot. And it's going to be interesting that the case of Eliezer, we're going to find that the story is almost reversed. Whereas in both the Yaakov story and the Moshe story, the stranger is the one who is helping the local. In the Eliezer story, it's the local who is helping the stranger. So we have a reversal of the roles of the person approaching the well versus the person who lives and is coming to the well. So that's another interesting juxtaposition of these three stories. The other one that I think was most important, most significant, is in our parsha, the word be'er is a motif word. It's going to appear in this story not once or twice, but 7 times the word be'er is going to appear. In the Rivka story, it appears nearly twice, and in the Moshe story, it appears only once. So clearly, here, much more than the other stories, the well is the focal point of the story, at least for the first part of the story until Rachel shows up. But the well is the focal point of the story. The Torah says, as I said, be'er, be'er, be'er. 7 times the word be'er is going to appear in the story. And second motif word, which appears only a few times, is the word v'ha'evan, this stone. There's a stone on top of the well, blocking access to the well. Does not appear in any of the other stories. That is a very significant development in our story. The Evan, this stone that's on top of the well, plays a significant role in the story. What is midrashically? They want to say that the Evan is connected to the Avanim, the Shnei Luchot Avanim, the Aseret Hadibrot that are written on 2 stones. But that's all midrashic. Clearly, the fact is there is a physical stone on top of the well, and Rav Hirsch and others want to suggest that this is very simply to tell us that there was a control on the well. The well was locked, as opposed to the other 2 stories where there's free access to the water, which seems to imply that it's a time where there's no problems with water. When Yaakov arrives in Haran, this well is covered. And as the shepherds are going to explain to him, the only way anybody can access the water is if everybody accesses the water together. It appears that the water is being rationed because clearly there are some problems with the water. So again, we are given this insight that Yaakov is arriving at a time where there seems to be shortage of water. Again, the Torah doesn't say that there was a famine in Haran when he arrives, but that clearly is alluded to by the fact that there is this lock on the well that nobody can open alone. That's at least that's what it's supposed to be for. So again, it's to give us insight, especially those of us who live in the modern age where we don't think of wells and the importance of being involved in drawing water. We think, oh, you turn the tap on and you got water. It's very, very interesting that the Torah places this water as the center of this story, as the center of the story with Rivka. We talked about that a little couple weeks ago. And ultimately with Moshe, we're going to find that wells play a significant part because water is an essential thing that you have to have. And most people didn't have running water back in those days. I mean, not all people didn't have running water, but most people didn't even have a well necessarily in their backyard. It was a communal well that generally supplied water, certainly in these parts of the world. Perhaps other parts of the world, people may have had their own well in their yard or in their within their property because water was more plentiful. But certainly here in the Middle East, water is a critical resource. And I think the Torah wants us to understand that and realize the importance of this as we go through. And that's why I say the significance of this be'er, specifically in our story where it's mentioned, as I said, multiple times. As I said, each of the three stories starts with somebody traveling, reaching a well. As Yaakov reaches a well, he says there's a be'er basadeh. Eliezer reaches this well, michutz la'ir al ber hamayim, and Moshe reaches Eretz Midian. Here by Moshe, it doesn't say he's traveling to. He says vayeshev al be'er. He sits down to rest when he gets to this water source because he's been running away from Paro. He's finally reached a place where he thinks he can find sanctuary from Paro. He's left Egypt, so he's no longer under Paro's jurisdiction. And he decides it's time to rest and renew and refresh and revigorate. Where else do I stop? You stop by a well because there's a water supply available. Now, interestingly enough, in our case, we have a story of what happens at the well. First, the Torah almost parenthetically puts verse 3. It tells us that when he arrives at the well, he sees that there's a stone. And the Torah parenthetically in Pasuk Gimel here tells us that this well was a place, V'nesfu shama kol ha'adarim, that all of the shepherds, all of the flocks of sheep would gather at this well so that the galuet evan me'al pi ha'be'er, so they could uncover the well by removing the stone. And and they would give the sheep to drink. And after they finished, they would return the stone back to the well. As I said, this was the lock on the well so that nobody could use it unless all of the shepherds were present and they all used it for their sheep. Nobody could go and hoard water or get water. That seems to be the implication. The Torah puts this in parentheses because Yaakov may not know that he just sees a stone. He doesn't know what's going on. He's a newcomer. He's just arrived. Our parsha continues that a bunch of these shepherds show up. Yaakov he says, okay, you a bunch of shepherds, where you come from? He finds out they're from Haran, and he starts engaging them in conversation by saying, are you familiar with Lavan? And they say, yeah, we know him. Now, interestingly enough, here this is a great example of how one should answer legal questions. You answer the question yes or no. You don't volunteer any information. Lavan, these people, his question is very straightforward. Do you know Lavan? They answer yes. They don't say, oh, by the way, he lives here, he's there, he's this, he's that. Nothing else is volunteered about them. But so Yaakov sort of has to probe with the next question. Is everything at peace with him? Vayomu shalom. Now they don't say shalom lo. They just say shalom. Say shalom. Peace, brother. We're not telling you anything about him. We're not going to start gossiping about Lavan. We don't know who you are. We don't want a word of whatever we're saying. Get back. We're just going to answer your questions. But they do add one piece of information, at least it appears that they add that, unless this is intended to be parenthetical. Now, as I said, there are two ways we can look at this. This can be the narrator parenthetically adding, by the way, Rachel is in the background and she's about to arrive. Or it could be the shepherd saying to Yaakov, oh, by the way, you want to know about Lavan? There's his daughter. She's coming right there with her sheep. So we can look at it either way. The Torah doesn't seem to pick one or the other. The notes seem to say that this is all part of what they say rather than being parenthetical. It's all one phrase as opposed to Vayomu Shalom. Had this B'nai Rachel Bito been a parenthetical addition, the notes more likely would have had Hashalom Lo Vayomu Shalom as the first half of the pasuk, and B'nai Rachel Bito B'ay Matzon as the second half. The fact that Vayomu Lema Shalom Lo is the first half of the pasuk in terms of the way the notes divide it, And Vayomru Shalom Inei Rachel B'to B'matzon seems to imply that at least the person who divided, who set the notes for how to read this pasuk, tells us that they are telling him that here comes Rachel. So which seems to agree with the Mefarshim who say that the shepherds tell him, we're not going to tell you a whole lot about love, and you want more information, go ask his daughter. Basically, that seems to be the way the person, as I said, the person who set the trop, the Mesorah, sets this verse up, even though, as I said, it could clearly be interpreted the other way. Okay, it continues. Yaakov asks them, why are you here so early in the day? Why aren't you out with the sheep? And why are you hanging around here? If you are guys are, the sheep aren't going to get any grazing over here. This is the well. This is where they get water, but I don't see anybody watering their sheep right now. So why are you all hanging out here? And now they give him the answer, which is the key, as I said, to him understanding the situation. That in order for us to, the reason we're gathered here is, you're actually right. We're going to give the sheep water right now because they need water, and then we're going to go out and graze. But we can't do that until everybody's here, because we need the combined strength of everybody to pick up this rock to be able to give the sheep water. Now, the whole reason the Torah introduces this, I think, whole concept of that they needed all of the shepherds to open this well is to show us later on, when Yaakov is going to do it all by himself, as we know the story continues, it's to show us I guess it's the miraculous nature of Yaakov's power, strength, to be able to do this. This is clearly not normal. There's nowhere where we're told that Yaakov was Samson, had the strength of 10 people in him. And the fact that he's able to do this is clearly miraculous. Interestingly enough, by the way, after this story, we don't hear about any more rocks on wells. So there's the Parshanim want to say that with Yaakov's arrival, suddenly Hashem blesses this area, and suddenly the water is a lot more plentiful, and they no longer need to ration the water. That's a surmise based on the fact that after this story, the well completely disappeared and are never heard from again. However, having said that, it could just be that the whole reason the Torah wants to focus on it, as I said, is because it is going to be the way through which Yaakov gains entry into Lavan's household. And it's in the same way that it's the way that Eliezer gains entry into Betuel's household through this meeting at the well. Now, interestingly enough, in the case of Moshe's story, which is the shortest, the briefest of the three well stories, it says he gets to the well and that's it. There's nothing else, just as he gets there. There's nothing else to introduce the story until the arrival of the next party, which is with the next section of the story. In each of the three stories, person arrives at well, and then the person that they're destined to meet comes to the well. It's always the person who is doing the meeting arrives at the place first. The person who is the local who's coming to do the meeting arrives second. I think that's a very interesting point. The Torah is showing that these three stories are to remind us of Hashgacha Pratit, that things don't happen haphazardly, accidentally. That in each of these three cases, the person who arrives at the well is clearly, obviously they're acting with free will, but they're clearly being prodded or being sent by Hashem to organize this meeting. I don't organize, not the right word, to meet this person who has suddenly arrived at the well unexpectedly or expectedly. Because at least in each of these three cases, it seems that the person traveling had no idea what their destination was in a specific sense. It was in a general sense they had a destination. And when they arrive at this well, God says, okay, this is the place you got to be. And now the person is going to come and meet you. So that's what happens in each of these cases. In our case, Odenim Adaber Imam, he is still schmoozing with the shepherds. Now, it's very interesting. This verse is a very interesting pasuk. It tells us Rachel arrives with the sheep, Kiro Ahi, because she was a shepherdess. Now, why does the Torah have to add those three words? They seem completely superfluous. Who else would be walking out to the well with sheep other than somebody who was a shepherd or a shepherdess? Why does the Torah have to add those three words, Kiro Ahi? And Parshanim, who want to try to build, the story of who Lavan is, which we're going to see a little bit about in the parasha, tell us that the Torah is emphasizing the fact that even though ordinarily we don't have female shepherds in the Torah, although we're going to have it, interestingly enough, we're going to have it in the Moshe story, the shepherdesses are female. This is because nobody else was willing to accept working for Lavan. That's what the Midrash wants to tell us, that the Torah is hinting to the fact that Lavan was not the easiest guy to work a business deal with. Nobody wanted to deal with him because he was able to, build loopholes around loopholes. And that's why he only one who could watch his sheep were his own children. And the fact that it's his daughter, again, later on, the Midrash wants to say that is to imply that when Yaakov arrives, Lavan has no sons, he only has daughters, and therefore they are the ones who are tending the sheep because there's nobody else to tend the sheep. Okay, that's all alluded to at the three words, Kiroahi, Rabbi. Okay. The rabbi said perhaps that it's clarifying that she's a shepherdess just to tell us that she wasn't just somebody just hanging out or looking for a pickup, somebody just walking around. Clearly, that's a possibility. But then why does it have? It's the fact that she's coming with the sheep. I mean, people who are going out to make a pickup usually don't walk around with a flock of sheep. I don't know. Maybe they do. I guess maybe that's like that's the pickup line. And if you're in the old days, you had a bunch of sheep so that you could pick up all the guys. I don't know. But the fact is that the Torah emphasized the fact that she's coming out with the sheep and she's a shepherdess seems again to be redundant. That's what the Parshanim picked up on. But clearly, the Torah is just saying, well, that's why she's coming out. Because otherwise, what is she doing at the well? Well, we would have assumed, just like Rivka came out to the well to get a little water for the family is the assumption. The assumption is that when Rivka comes out to the well, she doesn't have any sheep with her. She's not bringing, her family, her kids with her. The assumption is it was her day to get the water at the well for the family. That was a chore that had to be done. As I said, that's totally not part of our vocabulary. Going out, somebody has to go out to fetch the water. And we don't think of that because we are so used to turning a tap in the house and there's water. But that was clearly up until 200 years ago. That was clearly a mainstay of most households that somebody had a chore on the chore list. Got to go fetch water. Otherwise, there was no water in the house. So in this case, it's Rachel comes in. Again, in the case with Eliezer, he hadn't even finished asking Hashem, making the specific request of Hashem. Rivka Yotzeit. Rivka came out. Again, the difference, as I said, with Rivka, no sheep, but Kadal Shifma, she's just carrying the pitcher, which seems to imply that she just came out to fill up water for the house, as opposed to Rachel, who has no pitcher. She's just come with the sheep to get water for the sheep. So again, different stories. Now we get to the Moshe story in the third column, very different. Firstly, it tells us that there were these 7 daughters of the Choy Midjan. Batavona, Batidlena, Batmalenu, Haratim, Lashtot, Son Avihen. They had pails. They come and they draw water from the well and put it into the watering troughs. And they are, again, doing the same thing that the shepherds would be doing. They are watering the flock of their father. Again, interestingly enough, there the Torah doesn't say Kiroot Heina. Doesn't say that they were shepherdesses. It's understood from what they were doing that they were the shepherdesses. I mean, as I said, you don't go and schlep water out of a well, put it into watering troughs for the sheep if you're not the shepherdesses. So it nowhere mentions that they were shepherdesses, but it does say in this case, there's unlike the other 2 cases, in Moshe's case, something happens to interfere with the normal course. The normal course here, Rachel comes. We would have expected the next verse to be okay. All the shepherds gathered around. They picked the rock up and gave the flocks to feed, and then they went back to shepherding, to grazing. But that's not what happens, as we're going to see in a minute. But in Moshe's case, that the daughters have prepared. They're getting their flocks ready, and all of a sudden something interferes with that. other shepherds come by and throw them away. After they've done all the work of getting all the water out of the well, the other shepherds kick them away. Almost we would say, throw them out as being, oh, you're girls, get out of here. So clearly in each of the three cases, there's a different dynamic going on. In one case, as I said, all the shepherds are gathering. In another case, it's somebody's coming out to get water for her family. And in the third case, it's one group of shepherds has done a lot of work, and then suddenly they get thrown away by somebody else. So in each case, the protagonist in the story now has to respond. Okay. Now in Eliezer's case, actually, it's interesting because his response is exactly the opposite. As I said, it's in his case, he is asking her for a favor. Vayaytzay in the middle story, it's Vayaytzay. He runs to greet her, and he says, "Please give me some water to drink." Okay, which is exactly the reversal. See, he is asking her for a favor, as opposed to the other two stories. Now, in the Moshe story, Torah tells it very simply: Vayokam Moshe Vayoshion. Moshe gets up and saves them from the shepherds who have thrown them out. Hey, they just did all that work, slept all that well. Vayash gets so numb, and then he finishes making sure that the girls' sheep all have their fill before he lets the shepherds back. So Moshe has immediately gone and saved the day for them, at least apparently. Same thing happens in our story, which is exactly the opposite of the Eliezer story. Yaakov with Rachel bat Lavan achimo, that son Lavan achimo. Vayigash Yaakov vayogel even me'alpiav vayash son Lavan achimo. Notice, by the way, son Lavan achimo, Rachel bat Lavan achimo appears 1, 2, 3 different times in this verse. Okay, to emphasize the fact that Yaakov realizes he's come to the place where he wants to be. He's met a family member, and remember, he's come with nothing but the shirt on his back. He doesn't have, like Eliezer came with, lots of jewelry and gifts to give. So the first thing he does is he steps forward, he picks up the stone, puts it aside, feeds Lavan's sheep. Doesn't say they put the rock back. Doesn't say he puts the stone back. And then, interesting enough, it says, "Vayishak Yaakov Rachel." He kisses Rachel, Vayisad Kolo Vayev, and he starts crying. So the first question is, what kind of kiss was it? That's the first question. Okay, the assumption is it was, what we might call a greeting kiss. How old is Rachel? Great question. I don't have any answers. None of the Midrash, unlike Rivka, where all the Midrash want to tell us how old she is. I don't think there are any Midrashim that discuss Rachel's age at any point throughout the entire story. Same thing with Leah, which is, as I said, we go in degrees. We go from Sarah, who the Torah seems to explicitly tell us her age, to Rivka, who the Midrash says how old she is, to Rachel and Leah, where no discussion of their ages, at least that I'm aware. I'm sure there are Midrashim that discuss them. I just haven't seen them. So, okay. And again, he raises his voice and cries, and Rashi has to find, interestingly enough, Rashi doesn't come up with a simple answer why he cried. He cries because he's come empty-handed. He wants to give her something. Hey, I met my family, I want to give him a gift. But he has nothing to give her. That's why he's crying, according to Rashi's shot interpretation. According to his midrashic interpretation, he's crying because he sees prophetically that Rachel is ultimately going to die and not be buried together with him in Mar Rachel. It's a wonderful midrash. However, it's a midrash. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Now, as I said, in the Rivka story, we obviously have her response because there's a specific request, whereas the other stories, there's no request from the person who came out to the well. There was a favor done for them before we can continue the story and see what happens after this either favor was done one way or the other. So now we have what in two of these three stories, okay, in two in Bereshit, the next thing that happens is the person, Rivka and Rachel, find out that this person who has come from afar is related or is a representative of the family and goes to report about it. So Yaakov tells Rachel that he's her cousin. Eliezer gives her these gifts and asks her who she is and tells her that he's Avram's servant and he's come there. And then they respond by both, very interestingly, both in Rachel's case, we have this word vataratz, she runs to tell her father. In Rivka's case, vataratz, she runs again. There's this immediacy. Whereas in the Moshe story, there's no running. The girls the sheep have been fed, vatavono ruel avien. They get to their father, they come home to their father, okay? And he says, wait a minute, how'd you get here so fast? Because he's used to every day, the girls go to the well, they get thrown out by the shepherds finish, and then they will go and water their sheep, and then they come home. How'd you get home so quickly? So they answer him, Ish mitzvi tilanu miyad haroim, gam dolo lanu v'yashtatzon, he took care of us. In the other cases, there's nothing to add. It just says that they told their father, they ran to their father, because here, see, in Ruel's case, there's something different that he notices. Whereas in the other two cases, the protagonist, the person in the story, tells the family what's going on. They don't have to wait to be asked. The interesting thing here, as I said, if we go to the Moshe story first, most interesting is Yitro's response. Well, he's called Ruel, even though it's Yitro, we all know it's Yitro, but wait a minute, this guy helped you out. Where is he? What happened to him? Why'd you leave the guy? Now, it's very, very interesting here. Who are these girls? They're not Jewish girls. Who is their father? It's not a Jewish man. But his first response is, how could God did you such a big favor? How could you leave him all alone? You didn't even invite him in for a piece of bread or to refresh himself from the sun, a little bit of shade? Nothing? Go call him in. So we see, interestingly, that perhaps, as I said, this thread that runs through all three of these stories is clearly the thread of chesed, of somebody doing something for others to the extent, not because they accepted to be reciprocated for it, but in the end, there is a reciprocation because Kadosh Baruch Hu is the one who is supervising, if you will, overseeing these three stories. And I think that's why they're all, so as I said, I think they're all very much related in the lessons that they teach overall. The overarching lesson is of hashgacha pratit, of the fact that chesed is a critical component in a shidduch. I think that's the overwhelming lesson of all these, that if you want to get into a relationship, you've got to be able to share yourself, do something for somebody else if you want to be in a relationship. Don't think about doing things for you. Think about doing things for the other person in the relationship. That's the critical component of relationships, at least from the perspective of these three sections right here. And then we have the response, as I said, we talked about Ruel or Yitro's response. Now, in the other two, interestingly, the respondent is the same. It's both, in both cases, we have Rivka has a brother named Lavan in the case of Rivka. And what has happened? Vayaratz Lavan el Ha'ish. He runs out to meet Eliezer. Similarly, what happens when he finds Yaakov's arrived? Vayaratz Likvarto, he runs to greet him. And the greeting seems to be a very, very positive thing, even though, as I said, the Parshanim on Lavan give Lavan a very hard time, all because of this one phrase that it says right here in verse 30 in the Rivka story. When he saw the jewelry that his sister was wearing, that's when he runs out. And that on that verse alone, and plus the rest of the Lavan story that we have in our parsha, Lavan's entire reputation is based on the fact that he was a sharp dealer, and people were wary of dealing with him. Is all based on, as I said, this short verse by Nezem, and also the stories we're going to read about him changing Yaakov's agreement with Yaakov numerous times later in this week's parsha. But again, if we look at our parsha, it says, "Vayaratz likvarto," he runs out to greet him. Vayichabik lo, he hugs him. Vayinashik lo, he kisses him. Vayivyeu el beito, he brings him home. So we see that he seems to give him a very, what I would say, a very, very warm welcome. And yet, as I said, the Parshanim, Rashi quotes the Midrashim that, he was looking to see where Yaakov had the money hidden. He didn't come with 10 loaded camels. He's got to have, he's probably got the diamonds on the money belt or something there. He's got to have something. This is a wealthy family. They don't send their son out, traveling with just the shirt on his back. That's the midrash. But again, if we look at the literal pshat, it seems a very warm welcome. He hugs him, he kisses him, he welcomes him into his house, and he tells Lavan what's going on. What are these things that he tells him? He tells him that why he's coming, why he's here, what's going on. Okay, so if we look, as I said, through the three stories, clearly the overriding thing is, if I were a non-believer, I would say, wow, what great coincidences, all these coincidental things, people showing up at wells exactly at the right time, exactly when Moshe arrives, these girls show up, exactly when Eliezer shows up, Rivka shows up. Wow, three pretty strong coincidences. But if you know that Hashgacha Pratit, you say that clearly there's a reason why all of these three happen in and are described as, one shows up, the other shows up. It's almost as though they had a date prearranged at the well. They had already said, okay, I'll meet you at the well in 3 hours or whatever. So clearly that is, again, one of the undercurrents of the parsha. It's nowhere written that there's hashgacha pratit about these things, but it's clearly one of the undercurrents of the parsha. And as I said, the second clear undercurrent is the fact that the chesed is a clear component of the relationship that is to be developed. Okay, I'm going to stop here for a minute before we go on to the next section, which I want to talk a little bit about dreams. To open the floor up, if anybody has questions or comments at this point about the wells and well stories. So I open up to the floor here, open up to people on WhatsApp, on Zoom. If you've got any questions, comments, please. Anybody? Gershon, wait, hold on, Gershon, go ahead. You got to speak up though, so people can hear.
Okay. It talks about so Yaakov instantly falls in love.
Yes. Next, 2-3 psukim later, Yaakov instantly falls in love with Rachel. Yes.
Which is really something. Love at first sight and
he's already smitten with her. I mean, if they were literally translating the pasuk, it seems that Yaakov immediately falls in love with Rachel. I would. Go ahead. So you were going to say. Go ahead. So. Oh. Okay. Go ahead. So go ahead. Okay. Again, we can say that there are a number of factors in that. The first is always the Torah doesn't want to downplay this. First, the Torah makes a very important point of it, that Yaakov loves Rachel, and that's clearly well known everywhere after that the Torah focuses us on this. It's going to be the focal point of the rest of the book of Bereshit, is that Yaakov loves Rachel. The sons are going to have all kinds of problems because Yaakov loves Rachel. So clearly there seems to be, again, this recognition, and I would tend to think the fact is, whether this was only a physical, only a spiritual, only both, I have no idea. We have no idea. The Torah doesn't give us any inkling what was it about Rachel, other than telling us that she was a pretty beautiful young lady, that causes Yaakov to fall in love with her. Nowhere in the Torah does it give us a reason. But again, we have the same thing with Rivka loves Yaakov, no reason given. We had that last week. Yitzchak loves Esav. We have a reason why. Rivka loves Yaakov, no reason given. Yaakov loves Rachel, no reason given. I would suspect that that had Leah come out first, he probably would have fallen in love with Leah. I think that the fact is that this is the first young lady he's had a chance to meet. It was his first shidduch day. And he said, this is as good as any I'm going to get. Let's go for it. I mean, that's one way of looking at it. I don't know. I mean, that's, everybody has their own thing. How old is Yaakov? Great question. I can tell you that the Midrash says that he's 77 years old at the time. Okay, that's the Midrash. Yaakov, although actually that 77 is actually arrived at from the fact that when Yaakov meets Paro, he says he's 130 years old, and you work your way backwards, says, well, he had to be 77 when he got to the well, because according to a different Midrash, he was only 63 when he got the bracha last week's parsha. So 14 years, there's this 14-year gap. This is all a midrash, tomorrow at the end of Megillah. I can go into the mathematics offline if you'd like, how the Gemara arrives at that. But Yaakov, according to the midrash, was 77 at the time. How old is Rachel? I have no idea, but I don't think she was 3 years old. Okay, let's put it that way. I maybe she was, but who knows? Okay, so that's it as far as that. Any other questions from the Zoom? Comments? Okay, Rabbi, go ahead. Oh, that's a whole different. Yes.
Can you repeat that? I can't hear.
Yes, yeah, I will. I'll repeat what the rabbi said, that this concept of hashgacha pratit, of divine providence, is also very evident in the Yosef. You remember the Yosef story where Yosef can't find his brothers, and suddenly this guy shows up out of nowhere and just so happens to not only know who Yosef's brothers are, but he knows where they happen to be at the time. Yeah, so clearly, there's no shortage in the book of Bereshit of stories where somebody has to be in a certain place at a certain time, and God makes sure that they get to where they need to be. And I think, as I said, these three that we just talked about are clearly three of the stories in the Torah where that happens. Okay. Any other questions or comments from the Zoom? Okay, I'm going to move on. I'm actually going to move backwards a little bit, the parsha, to the opening chapter of the parsha, or the opening, I can't say chapter because it's all one chapter, but the opening verses of the Torah. And we're all familiar with Jacob's dream. And if I were to ask you, who is the dreamer in the book of Bereshit, everybody would say, well, Joseph, right? We all know Joseph is the dreamer. And yet, interestingly enough, while Joseph has a lot of dreams that he is associated with, he himself, there are only two of his dreams recorded in the Torah. Yaakov actually has three of his dreams recorded in the Torah. But actually it's interesting because in our parsha, we have two very, very different dreams. And that's why I wanted to focus on these two dreams, because we all know about Yaakov's dream with the ladder. It's a very, very well-known dream about angels climbing up and down ladders. God's at the top of the ladder. God talks to him and promises him that you're going to inherit Eretz Yisrael, and your seed will spread far and wide, and they'll be like the sand of the earth, and all sorts of wonderful promises. And then afterwards, Yaakov says, okay, that's fine. But he's still not sure about it. And then we get to the later on, after he spent 20 years in Laban's house, he has a very, very markedly different dream, which most people don't even know about. It's kind of hidden there in the last, next to, I think it's the fifth to sixth aliyah. Oh, we get to the end of the parsha, everybody's already fallen asleep from Torah reading because it's a long parsha. And nobody mentions this. But here's this. Yaakov is having a conversation with, and this is in chapter 30, this is the second column, Barak Lamed. Yaakov has had 20 years with Lavan. He's been working hard, and he has amassed a small fortune. And he's amassed, as I said, 12 children who are mentioned by name, as well as 4 wives. And he has decided it's time to go home, and he's having a conversation with Rachel and Leah about why it's time to go home. And he's explaining this to them. So this dream is not recorded as it's happened. It's Yaakov is relating to Rachel and Leah a dream that he had. And I looked up and I saw in a dream, the sheep that are being raised are akudim, are spotted, nikudim, speckled, redim, and with different colorings. So it's interesting that he has gone from dreaming about angels climbing up and down a ladder to sheep of different colors and different spots and different shades. So I think the interesting thing here about this is the fact that both of these are going to go further. They're not going to stop there. If I had just stopped there after the first verse that he dreams of a ladder with angels and he dreams of sheep, I would have said, what's happened to this man? He has clearly gone from this very, very spiritual individual dreaming about angels to this very, very worldly individual, or I might even say materialistic individual, because all he's dreaming about is sheep. So it seems as if something is wrong here. But again, the Torah does continue. There's more to the dream than just that. This is the second dream. In the first dream, it says Hashem appears to him and speaks to him and tells him, I'm Hashem, the God of Avram and the God of Yitzchak, and you're going to inherit Eretz Israel, and etc. But here in this dream, it's not God who appears to him. It's Vayomer Lai Malach Elokim B'Chalom. It's an angel now who's going to speak to him, not God directly. But B'Chalom, he says, Yaakov Omar Hineni. He says, here I am. Vayomer, and the angel says to him, Sano Einechore Kol Tudim Holim Alatzon Akudim Nekudim Uvrudim. Look at all of these sheep that are being born and that are here. They're all the right colors. Ki ra'iti et kol asher Lavano selach. I, meaning God, have seen how Lavan has treated you, and I, the God of justice, am making sure that you don't get swindled. So again, a very, very important message to Yaakov being delivered here, but it continues. I am the God, same God who spoke to you in that first dream. Remember, 20 years ago, you had this dream, and I'm the same one who spoke to you. And after you had that dream, it was such an awesome revelation. You set up a matzeva, you made an oath. Ata, now it's time. It's time to go home. So it's interestingly, because the other one ends with God's promise, and I will be with you, and I will guard you and watch over you wherever you're going. And again, the last promise God made, the last thing God says to him when he's dreaming at the beginning of this journey is, I will bring you back home. Don't worry, it'll all work out okay. And now God is appearing to him in the second dream saying, okay, the time's up, time to come home. So it's interesting that these two dreams, one at the beginning of the parsha, one at the end of the parsha, almost closed this loop on this whole 20-year experience with Lavan. As I said, in between, Yaakov has all his children, he has all his wives, and they're all going to come home with him, as opposed to where he starts out with nothing, and he's going to come home with everything now. These two dreams are almost the bookends of Yaakov's visit, extended visit with Lavan, and both of them really God is telling him the same thing. I am protecting you, and I will protect the Jewish people. So again, this another theme of the parsha of Vayaytzay is that Hashem protects the Jewish people, whether it's him, God directly in the first dream, or it's the angels in the second dream, or the angels of the first dream also. And interestingly enough, as we all know, the parsha begins with angels going up and down. The parsha ends with Yaakov leaving Lavan, traveling to a place where it says that Yaakov meets Malachei Elokim, he meets angels of God, and calls the name of the place that he meets them Machanayim. Again, one of the themes of the parsha is that Hashem is protecting Yaakov. The reason, the commentary suggests that, as I said at the beginning, this whole parsha is one long chapter, is because it is the chapter of Yaakov's personal exile. Yaakov spends these 20 years alone. He's not with his parents. He's not with his original family. Yes, he's found a new family. He's developed a new family. But the whole parsha is all about Yaakov and how Hashem is protecting Yaakov and seeing that he comes out of this with all of these wonderful blessings of family, of wealth, but most importantly, he's physically and emotionally intact after this 20 years of dealing with Lavan and dealing with all of the challenges that entailed. So with that, I'm going to stop. That was all I wanted to say, just a few things about this. But in each of these cases, as I said, the dream is there to reassure Yaakov and to direct him to the next station. In the beginning, it's to direct him that, yes, you got to go where you have to, Lavan, but I'm going to protect you. And at the end, it's time to go home, and I'm going to still be with you. I don't think I'm leaving you here at the gate. God says, I'm going to stay with you and continue to be with you. So that's, as I said, the three themes that the well story and these develop: concept of hashgacha pratit, the concept of chesed, and the concept of that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is always watching Yisrael, Yaakov Avinu, and through it the nation of Israel. So thank you all for joining. I open the floor up now to questions, comments, any feedback. So anybody.